Good evening and welcome to Poland Daily. I'm Konrad Gorlinski. The Polish Constitutional Tribunal has started working on the case of whether the Polish Constitution has primacy over EU law or not. Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki filed the case with the tribunal after the European Court of Justice declared parts of Poland's judicial reform to be incompatible with European law. The Polish government believes that the EU court is acting in Ultra Vires, meaning beyond its mandate. Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki presented the tribunal with a request on nearly 130 pages. In the document, he put forward his case for why he believes that the tribunal should examine the constitutionality of 3 EU treaties. It was formulated after an early March ruling of the Constitutional Tribunal of the European Union on the possibility for courts to review the correctness of the process of appointing judges. Professor Przemysław Żurawski-Welgrajewski points out that EU institutions have for years been systematically trying to extend the scope of their competencies. The European Court of Justice has a mandate only in the cases described in the acquis communautaire, meaning the areas contained in the EU treaties, and given to the European Court of Justice. It does not have the right to issue legal verdicts in areas outside of that. Poland is not an exception when it comes to testing the primacy of national law over EU law. Similar decisions have been made by the Supreme Court of Spain, French Council of State, and the German Constitutional Court in Karlsruhe. The EU is a political organization, so specific institutions are trying, in accordance with standard political practice, to extend the scope of their mandate. They will do so until the point where they are checked by member states that clearly delineate their role by rejecting their attempts at usurping power. According to a 2017 Pew Research Center survey of citizens in Western European countries, an overwhelming majority wanted to see the powers of states strengthened rather than transferred to EU institutions. And COVID-19 jabs will be mandatory for France's health workers, and anyone wanting to get into a cinema or board a train will need to show proof of vaccination or a negative COVID test. The new rules were announced by President Emmanuel Macron on Monday. Unveiling sweeping measures to combat a surge in infections, Macron said vaccinations would not be compulsory for the general public, but encouraged everyone to get the jab. France has an entrenched anti-vaccination movement, but authorities had so far believed they could curb the spread of the coronavirus by convincing enough people, including medical staff, to get inoculated voluntarily. For care workers and non-medical workers in hospitals, clinics, care homes, homes for handicapped people, for all professionals or volunteers who work in close contact with the elderly or those who are fragile, including at their homes, vaccinations would be made mandatory without waiting. I am aware of what I am asking of you, and I know that you are ready for this commitment. This is part, in a way, of your sense of duty. Under the new regime, health workers will now have to get vaccinated by September 15th or find a new job. Vaccination will also be compulsory for people working in retirement homes. Macron said that a health pass required to attend large-scale events or to go clubbing will be required much more widely, including for restaurants, cinemas, and theaters. It will also be required to board long-distance trains and planes from the start of August, giving a further incentive for people to get a shot. As you've understood, vaccinations are not immediately mandatory for everyone, but we will extend as much as possible the health pass to push as many of you as possible to get vaccinated. The health pass provides proof that a person has either been vaccinated against the coronavirus or has recently had a negative PCR test for COVID-19.
Et donc les régimes spéciaux devront être supprimés.
Newly released figures show that China's exports grew much faster in June than experts had expected. The rise in exports was driven by an increase in global demand led by an easing of lockdown measures and accelerated vaccination drives worldwide. Despite the good figures, a customs official warned that overall trade in the world's second biggest economy may slow in the second half of 2021, partly reflecting the COVID-19 pandemic uncertainties as the Delta virus variant wreaks havoc in some countries. China's Customs Administration spokesperson Lui Qiwen said imported inflation risks were manageable, but cautioned that the country's overall trade still faces uncertainties due to the global pandemic. At present, the coronavirus pandemic is still spreading in many places around the world, and the trend of the pandemic is complicated. There are still many uncertain and unstable factors facing the development of foreign trade. At the same time, in the second half of last year, China's foreign trade imports and exports increased by nearly 27% over the first half of last year. Because of the impact of a higher base, the year-on-year growth rate of imports and exports in the second half of this year may slow down, but imports and exports for the whole year are still expected to maintain a relatively fast rate of growth. Overall imports also beat expectations, though the pace of gains eased from May, with the values boosted by high raw materials prices, customs data showed. Thanks to Beijing's efforts in largely containing the pandemic earlier than its trading partners, the world's biggest exporter has managed a solid economic revival from the coronavirus-induced slump in the first few months of 2020. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has delivered a speech to the nation after days of protests, looting, and riots in the country. The president warned that the unrest could lead to food and medicine shortages in the next few weeks. In his speech, the president also stated that the protests have led to the cancellation of coronavirus vaccination efforts in some parts of the country and could lead to further disruption of the program just when the country was picking up the pace to inoculate its citizens. Police said disturbances had intensified as former President Jacob Zuma challenged his 15-month prison term in the country's top court. The sporadic pro-Zuma protests that broke out when he handed himself over last week had escalated into looting and arson, mainly in Zuma's home province of KwaZulu-Natal, but also in Gauteng, where the country's biggest city, Johannesburg, is located.
Some have characterized these actions as a form of political protest. This violence may indeed have its roots in the pronouncements and activities of individuals with a political purpose and in expressions of frustration and anger. At the beginning of this unrest, there may have been some people who sought to agitate for violence and disorder along ethnic lines. We know that the majority of our people have, out of principle, refused to be mobilized along these ethnic lines. However, what we are witnessing now are opportunistic acts of criminality with groups of people instigating chaos merely as a cover for looting and theft.
489 suspects in the two provinces have been arrested, and all government agencies have been mobilized. As always, thanks for tuning in this evening, and have a wonderful night.